This is Heliox, where evidence meets empathy. Independent, moderated, timely, deep, gentle, clinical, global, and community conversations about things that matter. Breathe easy, we go deep and lightly surface the big ideas. If I asked you to pinpoint the exact location and the exact environment where the very first primate lived, you would probably give me the same answer that evolutionary biologists have been giving for 40 years.
Yeah, you definitely point somewhere near the equator.
Right. You'd picture the dense, steaming jungles of the Congo Basin, or maybe the lush canopy of the Amazon.
Exactly.
You picture this tiny, nimble creature effortlessly swinging through thick, broadleaf vines, just totally bathed in intense tropical heat. But what if I told you that 66 million years ago, our earliest primate ancestor was actually frantically digging a hole in the freezing mud of North America?
Yeah, which is just wild to think about.
Right, trying to bury itself under dead pine needles just to survive this brutally cold, snowy winter.
It completely shatters the fundamental dogma of primate evolution. For decades, the scientific consensus was just totally locked onto this idea called the warm tropical forest hypothesis.
The warm tropical forest hypothesis?
Yeah. And this was the virtually unquestioned assumption that primates were born in a hot, humid paradise, and that the sweltering heat of the tropics was the primary evolutionary engine that shaped everything.
Everything from our forward-facing eyes to our grasping hands.
Exactly.
Well, today we are completely dismantling that jungle origin story. We're jumping into this monumental new paper published in PNAS, which is the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences.
It's a huge paper.
It really is. It's titled The Radiation and Geographic Expansion of Primates Through Diverse Climates. And the mission of this deep dive is to explore the, frankly, staggering, freezing truth about where our ancestors really came from.
Which involves some pretty incredible technology to figure out.
Oh, absolutely. We are going to look at how scientists basically built what is essentially a geographic and climatic time machine.
Yeah, using supercomputers, tectonic plate models, massive evolutionary family trees.
All to prove that the tropics aren't our ancestral cradle at all. They're actually just the final refuge.
Right. The narrative we are unpacking today is a story of extreme survival. It forces us to look at the primate lineage, not as, creatures of comfort lounging in a stable paradise.
Right.
But as the ultimate climate refugees, basically engaged in this multi-million-year intercontinental migration driven by violent environmental volatility.
That is just such a massive shift in how we think about this. So let's start by diagnosing the illusion here. How did the entire scientific community get this so wrong for 40 years?
Well, it's not like the warm tropical forest hypothesis just, materialized out of thin air.
Right. They had reasons.
Exactly. It was built on observable data.
Yeah.
But as this paper points out, that data was deeply systemically skewed. The illusion was built on two main pillars.
Okay, what's the first one?
The first is present-day observation. If you look at the current distribution of living extant primate species, the lemurs, the monkeys, the great apes, the vast majority of them are geographically restricted to a very narrow, specific band of tropical temperatures.
Right around the equator.
Yeah. So when you see that almost all your surviving relatives live in one highly specific environment, well, the default assumption is that this environment must be your ancestral home.
Which, that makes intuitive sense, but it's a massive logical leap. It's assuming the end of the marathon is also the starting line.
That's a great way to put it.
But there was a second pillar to this dogma too, right? One that's tied to this massive global heat wave in deep time.
Yeah, the PTM, the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum.
That's a mouthful.
It is, yeah. But basically, around 55 million years ago, the Earth underwent this period of intense, rapid global warming. Massive amounts of carbon were injected into the atmosphere, oceans acidified, and global temperatures just spiked dramatically.
So the whole planet got hot.
Really hot. During this period, tropical and subtropical forests expanded way beyond the equator, reaching high into the northern and southern latitudes.
We're talking about a true hothouse Earth, like palm trees growing in places that are now Arctic tundra, right?
Exactly. And when paleontologists looked at the fossil record, they noticed this sudden explosion in primate diversity and geographic spread that seemed to perfectly coincide with the PTM.
Oh, I see. So the logic crystallized.
Right. Primates love the tropics today. The Earth became a giant tropical hothouse during the PTM, And primate fossils from that era are super abundant. Therefore, tropical heat must be the primary catalyst for primate evolution.
But here is where the PNAS authors throw a massive wrench into the gears, because they point out a critical flaw in relying on the fossil record to determine ancient habitats.
A huge flaw.
It's this concept called taphonomic bias, or what we might just call graveyard bias, right?
Yeah, taphonomy is the study of how organisms decay and become fossilized. And the brutal truth is that fossilization is a statistical anomaly.
It's actually really hard to become a fossil.
It's incredibly hard. When an animal dies, it doesn't just, turn to stone. Its bones are crushed by scavengers, dissolved by soil acids, or weathered to dust by rain.
To become a fossil, an organism usually needs to be buried rapidly in an anoxic environment, so an environment without oxygen.
Right, usually under sediment in a lake bed or a sudden mudslide.
And here is the fatal flaw for the tropical hypothesis. Lush, steaming tropical rainforests are perhaps the absolute worst environments on the entire planet for fossil preservation.
They are terrible for it.
Yeah.
The soil is highly acidic, the humidity accelerates bacterial and fungal decay, and there is a massive density of scavengers.
So bones left on a jungle floor will just disappear in a matter of months, leaving absolutely zero trace for paleontologists to find 60 million years later.
Exactly. So we have this massive historical blind spot.
Wait, so assuming early primates only lived in the tropics just because we found their fossils there well, it's like assuming everyone in ancient history lived in Egypt just because mummies preserved well in the desert.
Yes, that is the perfect analogy. The graveyard bias means paleontologists were finding early primate fossils in specific locations, like the Green River Formation in Wyoming, which used to be a massive system of lakes, and they were falsely concluding that primates only inhabited those types of environments. The map of fossils isn't a map of where primates actually lived.
It's just a map of where the Earth happened to be good at making fossils.
Exactly. The PNAS authors argue that paleontologists just fell into this trap of circular reasoning. Historically, whenever a researcher found a primate fossil, they would retroactively declare that the ancient environment must have been a warm, lush forest.
Just because it had a primate in it.
Right. They were using the presence of the animal to define the climate, and then using the climate to explain the evolution of the animal. It was a completely closed loop of biased assumptions.
That's wild. So to break that loop, the researchers behind this new study realized they had to abandon the fossil map completely.
They had to.
They couldn't just look at dead bones. They had to build a system that could bypass the graveyard bias entirely. They needed a geographic time machine.
And the mechanics of how they built this model are genuinely mind-bending. It starts with the family tree.
Okay, let's break this down, because I really want you to understand how cool this is.
So they compiled the most comprehensive phylogeny or evolutionary family tree of primates ever constructed. Specifically, they looked at the superorder Eurchunta.
Eurchunta?
Yeah, which includes all living and extinct primates, plus their closest non-primate relatives, like tree shrews and colugos.
Which are these weird gliding mammals.
Yeah, exactly. So we're looking at a data set of nearly 900 distinct species.
And crucially, this includes distinguishing between crown primates and stem primates. I think we should clarify that difference because it's vital to the timeline.
Yeah, that's a really important distinction. A crown group consists of all the living representatives of a collection of species, plus their most recent common ancestor, plus all the extinct descendants of that specific ancestor.
So the crown primates represent the lineage that successfully made it to the modern era.
Right. Stem groups, on the other hand, are the extinct offshoots. They are the early cousins that branched off before that most recent common ancestor and eventually hit an evolutionary dead end.
Got it. So by mapping both the successful lineages and the failed offshoots, the researchers get a complete picture of all the evolutionary pressures at play.
Precisely. So they take this massive phylogenetic tree and they have to map the geographic coordinates for every single one of those 900 species.
For the living ones, they pull exhaustive modern range data. Where do they live today?
And for the extinct ones, they plot the exact longitude and latitude of where the fossils were extracted.
But wait, plotting a 60-million-year-old fossil on a modern map of the Earth is scientifically useless, right? Because the Earth's surface is completely different now.
Exactly. And this is where they introduced the paleo map models.
I love this part.
It's so cool. Plate tectonics tells us that the continents are in constant slow-motion transit. If you unearth a fossil in modern-day Montana, the geographic coordinates of Montana today are not where that patch of Earth was located during the Paleocene epoch.
Right, it was somewhere else entirely.
So the paleomap models are these incredibly sophisticated geological reconstructions that run continental drift in reverse.
It's literally a reverse GPS for plate tectonics.
It really is. They allow researchers to take the modern coordinates of a fossil site and track that specific tectonic plate backward in time, calculating its exact position on the globe at million-year intervals over the last 76 million years.
That is just incredible. You plug in the fossil, you wind the clock back 60 million years, and the map physically shifts to show you where that animal was actually standing in deep time.
Yeah, but locating the ancient latitude and longitude doesn't tell us if the primate was sweating in a jungle or shivering in a snowstorm.
Right. Because geography is not climate. Just because you know where it was on the map doesn't mean you know the weather.
Exactly. So to solve the climate variable, they layered on something called the HAD-CM3 model,
The HAD-CM3 model.
which is the Hadley Center Coupled Model, version 3. It is a highly advanced general circulation model. It's actually the exact same kind of supercomputer simulation that climatologists use today to predict future global warming scenarios.
But instead of running it forward to predict our future, they run it backward.
Yes. The model divides the ancient Earth's atmosphere and oceans into a three-dimensional grid. It calculates complex fluid dynamics, the shifting albedo of the Earth's surface, which is how much sunlight it reflects, the greenhouse gas concentrations of different epochs, and the variation in solar radiation.
They are literally running the physics of the entire planetary atmosphere in reverse to get the local weather forecast for Tuesday, 60-something million years ago.
Basically, yeah. The HAD-CM3 model allows them to determine the specific, highly localized monthly paleotemperatures and paleoprecipitation rates for any given coordinate on their shifted tectonic map.
Okay, so let me make sure I have this straight. They have the evolutionary tree showing who evolved from whom.
Right.
They have the paleo map showing where the ground physically was.
Yes.
And they have the HAD-CM3 supercomputer telling them how hot and how wet that ground was.
Exactly.
How do they even combine these three massive, totally disparate data sets to find the origin point?
They integrated all this data using a Bayesian statistical framework, which they refer to as the GEO model.
Okay, Bayesian math.
Yeah. Bayesian phylogenetics is incredibly powerful because it doesn't just give you a single static answer. It calculates probabilities by constantly updating its assumptions as new data is introduced.
I always think of Bayesian probability like tracing a rumor back to its source.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it.
Right. Like, if you know 10 people who heard a rumor, and you know geographically where they live, and you know who they are friends with, you can use statistical math to pinpoint the most probable neighborhood where the rumor started, even if you never find the actual original person who started it.
That is a highly effective way to conceptualize it. In this case, the researchers are looking at the internal nodes of the family tree, the ancestor.
Like the people who passed the rumor along.
Right. If you know the geographic ranges and the climate tolerances of two descendant species, and you factor in the physical shifting of the continents and the changing atmospheric physics over millions of years, the Bayesian math can calculate the highest probability location and the highest probability climate for their shared common ancestor.
But the researchers realized they had one more massive hurdle, didn't they?
They did.
Because if they were going to redefine the climate history of primates, they couldn't just rely on the vague, subjective language that paleontology had been using for decades. The paper notes that past studies would casually throw around terms like lush forest or paratropical or subtropical.
Yeah, the terminology is entirely subjective. I mean, my definition of a lush environment might be vastly different from yours, depending on what specific flora we are analyzing.
It was an ambiguous, vibes-based approach to paleoclimate.
Very vibes-based. So, to eliminate this ambiguity, the PNAS teams standardized all of their findings using the strict, mathematically rigid Köppen-Geiger climate classification system.
The Köppen-Geiger system, this is the system that completely removes human interpretation from the equation, right? It relies entirely on hard mathematical thresholds.
Yes. The KG system classifies the world's climates based on strict numerical thresholds of monthly air temperature and precipitation.
No vibes allowed.
No vibes. It was originally developed empirically to map out the distribution of biomes by analyzing exactly what types of vegetation can physically survive under specific atmospheric constraints. It divides the globe into 5 primary categories.
Okay, what?
Tropical, which is A, arid, which is B, temperate, C, cold, D, and polar, E. And within those 5 macro categories, there are 30 highly specific subcategories.
So when a scientist uses the KG system, a tropical climate isn't just a feeling of humidity. It is a mathematical reality.
Exactly. In the KG system, A tropical climate, the A category, dictates that the environment must be hot all year round, with the average temperature of every single month strictly exceeding 18 degrees Celsius, or roughly 64 degrees Fahrenheit.
Okay, so every single month has to be above 64 degrees.
Right. If the temperature in January drops to 17 degrees Celsius, the mathematical threshold is broken, and it can no longer be classified as tropical.
Wow. Okay, so this was the ultimate litmus test for the warm tropical forest hypothesis.
It really was.
So the researchers had built the ultimate unbiased geographic time machine. They fed it the tectonic data, the supercomputer atmospheric physics, and the strict mathematical thresholds of the KG system. They traced the genetic tree all the way down to the internal node representing the very first common ancestor of all crown primates.
The moment of truth.
The engine hums, the math resolves. Where does the geographic probability point? Where are we?
The time machine points directly to North America.
North America.
Yes. Out of all the primary Bayesian models they ran, 80% of the statistical probability landed the common ancestor of all crowned primates squarely on the North American continent.
That is insane.
They even ran secondary, even more complex models to account for extreme variables and phylogenetic uncertainty, and it still pointed to North America 70% of the time, with Western Europe trailing as a secondary possibility at 30%.
And what about the tropics? Did they test Africa and Asia?
They explicitly tested the models against Africa and Asia, which, are the modern strongholds of primate diversity, and the math aggressively rejected them. The statistical evidence overwhelmingly favored North America.
That alone requires textbooks to be rewritten. But the location isn't even the most shocking part. It's the climate data extracted for that specific North American coordinate.
Yeah, this is where it gets really crazy. When they took the local paleotemperature and paleoprecipitation data generated by the HAD-CM3 supercomputer for that specific North American location 66 million years ago and ran it through the rigorous thresholds of the Cup and Geiger system, the climate classification for our earliest primate ancestor did not come back as Category A tropical.
What did it come back as?
It came back as Category D.
Category D. Wait, cold.
Cold, specifically a subcategory called DIFA.
Okay, let's break down the actual meteorological reality of a DIFA climate. What does that mean?
The KG system defines it as a cold climate with no dry season, featuring hot summers. So the temperature in the warmest month of the year would climb above 22 degrees Celsius. A pleasant, warm summer.
Sounds nice.
But the defining, inescapable feature of the cold macro category is the winter. To be classified as a D climate, the coldest month of the year must experience average temperatures at or below 0 degrees Celsius, freezing.
I need to pause here because the biological implications of this are just staggering. I am trying to mentally superimpose a primate, our ancestor, into a freezing, snowy 0-degree winter.
It's hard to picture.
It is. And the immediate problem I'm seeing is physics. The early stem and crown primates we were talking about 66 million years ago were not massive insulated silverback gorillas.
No, they were diminutive. Most of them were incredibly small. We're talking about creatures the size of a mouse, perhaps scaling up to the size of a small squirrel.
Which creates a massive thermodynamic crisis. Small mammals have an incredibly high surface area to volume ratio.
Exactly.
Biologically, that means they bleed body heat into the environment at a catastrophic rate. They have blisteringly high metabolic rates just to maintain their internal core temperature.
They burn energy so fast.
So how does a tiny fruit and insect-eating primate survive a brutal, freezing North American winter without instantly succumbing to hypothermia and freezing to death? I mean, where are they finding insects in the snow?
It is the ultimate biological paradox.
Yeah.
And solving it forces us to completely reevaluate the physiological capabilities of early primates.
Okay, how did they do it?
Well, the PNAS researchers don't just leave this as a mystery. They point directly to modern-day biological analogs to prove the mechanics of this survival. The answer is heterothermy.
Heterothermy.
Specifically, the ability to utilize daily torpor and prolonged hibernation.
Wait, really? We usually associate hibernation with bears, not primates.
I know, it seems totally counterintuitive to our modern perception of primates, but it is entirely possible, and it actually happens today.
Really? Where?
The researchers highlight the behavior of modern dwarf lemurs, specifically species like Chirogalias crosslei and Chirogalias zebrae.
Dwarf lemurs.
Yeah, these are tiny, primitive primates living right now in the high-altitude, mountainous regions of Madagascar.
Oh, wow.
Their specific local environment is highly seasonal and deeply unpredictable. During the winter months, temperatures plummet to freezing, and their food sources, fruits and insects, completely vanish.
So they are facing the exact same thermodynamic crisis as our North American ancestors.
The exact same one.
If they can't migrate out of the cold and they can't find food to fuel their hyperactive metabolisms, what is their biological workaround?
They abandon homeothermy. They literally stop trying to keep their bodies warm. Instead, they dig.
They dig.
Yeah, these tiny dwarf lemurs descend from the trees, dig into the earth, and burrow beneath a soft, insulating layer of plant roots, humus, and decaying forest litter.
Wow.
Once they're insulated from the freezing air above, they enter a state of continuous hibernation that can last for months.
I want to dig into the molecular mechanics of torpor here because it isn't just taking a long nap, right? It is a radical physiological shutdown.
Oh, absolutely. When a mammal enters torpor, its heart rate drastically plummets. Its breathing slows to a crawl.
And most importantly, it suppresses its internal thermostat.
Right. The lemur's core body temperature drops dramatically, sometimes hovering just a few degrees above the ambient temperature of the freezing dirt around it.
Which is terrifying, biologically speaking.
It is, but by dropping their temperature, they drastically reduce the amount of caloric energy required to stay alive. They burn through specialized fat reserves like brown adipose tissue, which generates heat without shivering. Just enough to keep their organs from suffering irreversible cellular damage.
It is a profound shift in how we must view the primate origin story. The early primates didn't survive because they were coddled by tropical heat. They survived because they were biologically resilient enough to endure brutal, low-productivity, highly seasonal environments by temporarily shutting their bodies down and sleeping through the lethal cold.
That's exactly it.
So the very first chapter of the primate story features a tiny, shivering creature frantically digging a hole in the frost-hardened mud of ancient North America, burying itself under dead pine needles and clinging to life in a state of suspended animation.
They were incredibly tough.
But if they possessed this incredible biological mechanism to survive the freezing cold, why didn't they just stay there?
Right, that's the next big question.
If North America was their ancestral stronghold, what force eventually pushed them to migrate across the entire planet?
That question leads us to the second major revelation of this paper, the actual engine of primate evolution. What drives a lineage to disperse across shifting continents and speciate to splinter into thousands of new, diverse species? For 40 years, the old dogma pointed to the global warming of the PTM.
Right, the hothouse Earth we talked about earlier.
The prevailing logic was that the entire planet got hot, the tropical forests expanded geographically, and the primates simply walked through an open door following the expanding warmth.
The old theory paints their migration as this sort of leisurely expansion. A global heat wave created new, prime real estate, and they just passively spread out to occupy it.
But when the PNAS team tested this assumption, the math completely rejected it.
Really? Completely?
Completely. They ran complex phylogenetic regressions.
Okay, what is a phylogenetic regression?
It's a statistical technique used to analyze the relationship between different variables, in this case, geographic dispersal distance and speciation rates, while actively controlling for the shared evolutionary history of the species.
So they are basically checking the math to see if temperature really did push them to evolve.
Exactly. And when they regressed the primates' evolutionary milestones against the global temperature record, they found absolutely zero meaningful correlation.
Wait, so the massive global heat wave of the PTM had no statistical effect on their evolutionary expansion?
Not at all.
If the world getting globally hotter didn't push them to move and evolve, what did?
The global average was irrelevant. What actually mattered to a tiny primate was its immediate local reality. The regression models proved that the driving force behind their dispersal and speciation was local temperature and local precipitation. But the critical variable wasn't whether a local area was hot or cold or wet or dry.
Then what was it?
The catalyst was the rate of change.
The volatility.
Exactly. The researchers measured how rapidly the local temperature and local precipitation shifted over evolutionary timescales. And they found a massive, statistically undeniable correlation.
So it wasn't about being hot or cold.
No. When a local environment changed violently and rapidly, when it got suddenly wetter, suddenly drier, suddenly hotter, or suddenly colder, primates were forced to disperse much further geographically, and the rate at which they split into new species accelerated dramatically.
I want to make sure the mechanics of this are crystal clear because it shifts the entire paradigm.
Yeah, it really does.
The direction of the climate change didn't matter. They weren't inherently chasing the heat, and they weren't inherently running from the cold. They were running from instability.
It is the biological imperative of move or die. This is the mechanism of allopatric speciation on a grand scale.
Allopatric speciation, meaning new species forming because they get physically separated.
Yes. When local weather patterns shifted violently, the local flora changed. The insect populations crashed or boomed, and the environment became totally unpredictable. The primate populations that survived these chaotic shifts were the ones capable of packing up and moving massive distances to find new, stable ground.
And as they fled this local volatility, populations got physically splintered. I mean, imagine a primate population forced to migrate because their local temperate forest is rapidly drying out into an arid scrubland.
Right, they have to get out of there.
Part of the population flees north over a mountain range, and part of the population flees south across a drying river valley. Suddenly, they are geographically isolated from one another.
And they can't interbreed anymore.
Exactly. They are facing different local stressors, different predators, and different food sources. Over tens of thousands of years, their DNA drifts apart, they adapt to their new local niches, and eventually, reproductive isolation sets in.
One species has become two entirely new species.
Volatility forces movement, movement forces isolation, and isolation breeds new species.
That is the exact evolutionary engine at play.
Yeah.
And the paper notes the grim alternative, too. Early stem primates, like the Plesiadapiforms, were highly successful for a time.
The Plesiadapiforms?
Yeah, they had specialized teeth and specific ecological niches. But the fossil record shows they ultimately went extinct.
Why?
They didn't die out because of a directional global cooling trend. They went extinct because they couldn't migrate or adapt fast enough when their specific localized neighborhood became too volatile.
So they couldn't run.
Right. They lacked the dispersal capacity to outrun the rapid rate of local climate change.
The lineages that survived, the genetic lines that eventually led through millions of years of chaos directly to humanity, were the ultimate climate refugees.
That's exactly what they were.
They were the ones who refused to remain static when the environment shifted beneath their feet. Rapid local change acted as a brutal selective pressure, weeding out the inflexible and rewarding the highly mobile.
So if they were constantly on the run from these volatile local climates, forced to continuously disperse further and further away from their freezing North American origins, we have to look at the timeline of that epic multi-million-year migration.
Break down this itinerary for us, because if they started in the cold, how long did it take them to actually reach the tropical jungles we associate them with today?
The researchers divided the entire primate evolutionary radiation into 3 distinct temporal windows, and the resulting timeline completely inverts the traditional narrative.
Okay, let's hear it.
If you picture the primate journey across the Cenozoic era as a marathon, the warm tropics were not the starting line. The tropics were the finish line.
Okay, let's look at the first window.
The first window is the early radiation, spanning from 66 million years ago to roughly 47.8 million years ago. This covers the Paleocene and early Eocene epochs.
So this is right after the dinosaurs get wiped out.
Right. During this massive expanse of time, the Bayesian geographic models show that the vast majority of transitions were not into tropical environments.
Where were they going?
The dominant movement was from cold climates like their North American origin into temperate climates.
Okay, so they're moving out of the brutal freezing zones where they had to hibernate and into slightly milder but still distinctly non-tropical temperate forests.
Yeah, exactly.
They are still dealing with distinct seasons, still dealing with chillier weather, but perhaps the winters aren't quite as lethal.
Then we enter the middle radiation, from 47.8 million years ago to 23.03 million years ago. This covers the Middle Eocene through the Oligocene epoch.
All right, what happens here?
Here, the mathematical models reveal another unexpected shift. The major evolutionary transition wasn't from temperate to tropical. It was from temperate climates into arid climates.
Arid climates. So we are talking about dry scrublands, savannas, environments with significantly less rainfall and a much more open canopy.
Right, they're dealing with drought.
They are adapting to drought and lower humidity. They're still nowhere near a lush, steaming jungle.
Finally, we reach the late radiation, also known as the Neogene period. This stretches from 23.03 million years ago right up to the present day.
The final stretch.
It is only in this final, relatively recent chapter of their evolutionary history that the models show the major, definitive transition from arid climates into the stable, tropical climates we instantly associate them with today.
I really need to highlight the math on this for you listening. They spent over 40 million years, the vast majority of their existence as a lineage, roughing it in freezing snow, temperate woods, and dry, arid scrublands before they ever fully established themselves in a tropical rainforest.
It's a completely different timeline.
Why the sudden shift to the equator so late in the game?
To understand that final push into the tropics, we have to look at the massive planetary changes occurring during the Neogene period.
What was going on with the Earth?
Over the last 23 million years, the Earth's geology and atmospheric physics underwent a massive transformation. The Drake Passage opened between South America and Antarctica, allowing the Antarctic circumpolar current to form.
Oh, right.
This thermally isolated Antarctica, leading to the rapid expansion of massive ice sheets at the poles. The entire planet cooled significantly.
And as the planet cooled, the global water cycle shifted.
Crucially, massive mid-latitude deserts began to grow and expand rapidly across the globe. This is the period when the vast Saharo-Arabian desert systems began spreading.
Oh, wow.
The temperate and arid zones in the mid-latitudes, where the primates had been surviving for tens of millions of years, suddenly became incredibly hostile, shrinking rapidly or experiencing extreme seasonal volatility.
So the local climates became violently unstable once again.
Exactly.
Based on our move or die engine of evolution, the primates had to run. But this time, the mid-latitudes were freezing or turning to dust. Where do they go?
They are pushed toward the equator.
They are seeking refuge in the only stable, continuously warm, reliable biome left on a cooling, drying planet. The tropical equatorial forests.
The tropical rainforest isn't the cradle of primate civilization. It is a final sanctuary. The modern prevalence of primates in warm, stable tropical climates is not because they were born there. It is the end result of a grueling 40-million-year evolutionary filtration process.
That is just, it's incredible.
The survivors of the cold, volatile north and the drying mid-latitudes were eventually pushed south into the only stable haven left on Earth.
You could almost call the modern tropical rainforest a retirement community for the primate lineage.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
They spent tens of millions of years fighting through the cold and the dust, forging their evolutionary toolkit in the harshest environments imaginable. And only when the rest of the world froze over or dried up did they finally settle down in the warm, stable tropics.
It forces a total paradigm shift in evolutionary biology. Because if our ancestors spent their most formative, defining evolutionary epochs in the cold and the temperate zones, it means we have to rethink everything about the functional origin of the traits that make a primate a primate.
This is the part that genuinely rewrites the textbooks. I mean, think about the core morphological traits that separate a primate from, say, a dog or a deer.
Right.
We have grasping hands with opposable thumbs. We have flat nails instead of sharp claws. And we have forward-facing eyes, giving us stereoscopic binocular vision for precise depth perception.
And for decades, evolutionary biologists explained the origin of these specific traits using two major theories: the visual predation hypothesis and the terminal branch feeding hypothesis.
Okay, let's break this down. The visual predation hypothesis, which was famously championed by anthropologist Matt Cartmill, argued that forward-facing eyes and grasping hands evolved synchronously so that early primates could become highly efficient, visually guided hunters of insects, right?
Yes. They needed stereoscopic depth perception to spot the camouflaged bug and grasping hands to quickly snatch it from the bark.
And the terminal branch feeding hypothesis.
That was proposed by Robert Sussman. He argued that these traits evolved so primates could carefully and securely navigate out to the very thinnest, most fragile ends of tree branches, the terminal branches, to grab nutrient-dense fruits and flowers that heavier clawed animals couldn't reach without falling.
Both of those hypotheses make complete biomechanical sense.
They do.
But the context was wrong. Because of the graveyard bias we talked about, biologists assumed these highly specific, delicate adaptations happened in a lush, broadleaf tropical jungle.
Right.
They imagined early primates using their newly evolved grasping hands to grip thick tropical vines, or using their binocular vision to spot brightly colored tropical canopy fruits.
But the PNAS models proved they weren't in a tropical jungle. If these dietary and navigational specializations occurred in the earliest primates, they happened in cold, mixed coniferous forests in North America.
Which totally changes the mechanics of the environment. Our grasping hands didn't evolve to swing on smooth jungle lianas.
Oh.
They might have evolved to carefully navigate freezing, prickly pine branches.
Yeah, and the researchers point to a fascinating paleobotanical connection to support this.
Hmm.
Around 66 million years ago, in the exact same North American geographic regions where the primate common ancestor likely originated, paleobotanists find an absolute abundance of fossils from a specific massive group of plants called rosids.
Rosids. What exactly falls under the rosid classification?
It is a massive clade of flowering plants, or angiosperms, that are highly adapted to temperate, non-tropical climates. Today, the rosid clade includes everything from oaks and elms to apples and roses,
Rosids.
hence the name rosids.
Right, they are the characteristic backbone of coniferous and mixed deciduous forest ecosystems. The researchers suggest that the origin of the primate toolkit, the grasping hands, the forward-facing eyes, the flat nails, might be inextricably linked to the massive evolutionary radiation of these cold-adapted rosid plants. The early primates were literally co-evolving with the temperate flora.
Exactly.
They were figuring out how to extract resources from temperate trees, how to navigate the complicated, specific architecture of cold weather canopies, and how to survive the winter frost. We didn't get our hands by lazily picking bananas in the sun.
We got them by clinging to freezing pine needles and foraging for resources in a brutal temperate winter.
That is just amazing. So the geographical mystery of our origins has been solved by this Bayesian time machine, but this study basically opens up an entirely new frontier of research, doesn't it?
It does. The next step for evolutionary biologists is to hunt for the evidence of this freezing origin story, not in the ground, but in our DNA.
If our earliest ancestors survived the North American winters by hibernating, there have to be ghosts of that extreme survival strategy buried deep in our genome.
Exactly. Geneticists will now likely begin searching for the genomic signatures of heterothermy.
The hibernation genes.
Right. The underlying genetic architecture that controls the ability to enter daily torpor or prolonged hibernation. They will be looking for ancient, highly conserved adaptations in the genes that regulate energy metabolism, specifically those tuned for extreme cold exposure.
Because even though we live in modern houses with central heating and wear insulated coats, we still carry the unbroken genetic legacy of those tiny, shivering survivors.
We do?
We might still possess the dormant genetic pathways that once allowed our ancestors to drop their core temperatures and sleep through the snow.
Researchers might begin comparing human and great ape genomes to the DNA of specific cold-adapted monkeys living today.
Like who?
For example, the snub-nosed monkeys, or certain colobine monkeys in the high-altitude regions of Asia, who regularly survive freezing temperatures and snow today. By comparing their active cold-weather genetic pathways to our own dormant ones, we might uncover the definitive molecular proof of our cold-weather origins.
It is incredible how a single shift in perspective correcting for the graveyard bias of where bones happen to fossilize can completely unravel a 40-year-old biological dogma.
It's a monumental shift.
We started this deep dive picturing a warm, easy tropical paradise, a story of passive expansion fueled by global heat. But the reality uncovered by the tectonic and climatic modeling is so much harsher and, honestly, so much more profound.
It reframes the primate lineage as a story of supreme resilience, driven not by the comfort of a stable environment, but by the relentless, unforgiving pressure of environmental instability.
Primates did not start on easy mode. We originated in the freezing, snowy winters of a shifting North American continent. Our tiny ancestors survived by abandoning homeothermy, hiding in the dirt, and sleeping through the lethal cold.
That was the only way.
And we didn't lazily follow a global heat wave across the globe. We only conquered this planet because our local weather kept changing so violently and so unpredictably that we were constantly forced to move, to splinter, and to evolve just to stay alive. The lush tropical jungles weren't our cradle. They were the only safe harbor left after 40 million years of outrunning the storm.
The selective pressure of rapid local climate change created a lineage defined by its immense dispersal capacity. The ones who stayed put, the ones who couldn't adapt to the changing neighborhood, went extinct.
Which leaves us with a final, highly provocative thought to carry forward. This study proves that the defining characteristic of the early primates that survived, the lineages that ultimately led to humanity, was their inherent capacity for massive geographic migration in response to rapid, volatile changes in their local climate.
They survived because they ran.
Exactly. They survived because they ran. Today, you and I are facing a century of unprecedented, rapid, human-induced local climate change. The temperatures are spiking, the weather patterns are becoming violently unstable, and the biomes are shifting beneath our feet once again.
It's history repeating itself.
Yeah, it really makes you wonder, as a modern species, have we retained that ancient, vital evolutionary instinct to pack up and move when the environment becomes unlivable? Or have we finally built a world with so many rigid borders, massive cities, and concrete walls that we are now too rooted to run?
Heliox is produced by Michelle Brucker and Scott Bleakley. It features reviews of emerging research and ideas from leading thinkers, curated under their creative direction with AI assistance for voice, imagery, and composition. Systemic voices and illustrative images of people are representative tools, not depictions of specific individuals. Thanks for listening today. 4 recurring narratives underlie every episode: boundary dissolution, adaptive complexity, embodied knowledge, and quantum-like uncertainty. These aren't just philosophical musings, but frameworks for understanding our modern world. We hope you continue exploring our other episodes, responding to the content, and checking out our related articles at helioxpodcast.substack.com.